The dust on Kepler 442b still tasted like burnt metal and death. 3 months had passed since the final battle that ended the cosmic war. But Marcus Chen could still smell the acrid smoke of plasma cannons and melted starship hulls every time the wind shifted. The human victory had come at a terrible cost. Entire worlds lay in ruins, and the galaxy's power structure had crumbled overnight. Marcus adjusted his worn military jacket as he walked through the crowded marketplace of New Geneva, the hastily constructed settlement that served as humanity's administrative center on this conquered world. The place buzzed with activity as soldiers, merchants, and refugees from a dozen different species tried to rebuild their lives from the ashes of interstellar conflict. He wasn't here by choice. Command had given him a simple mission: attend the war reparations auction and acquire anything of strategic value for the human colonial effort. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity, once considered the galaxy's youngest and weakest species, now held the power to redistribute the wealth of fallen empires. The auction house was a converted Zeltharian cathedral, its crystalline spires now draped with human military banners. Inside, beings from across the galaxy sat in uncomfortable silence as lot after lot of confiscated goods passed before them. Weapons, ships, territory deeds, and worse, the remnants of civilizations that had chosen the wrong side in humanity's war for survival. Marcus had seen enough combat to know that war made monsters of everyone, but the sight of the slave auction still turned his stomach. The practice had been outlawed in human space for centuries, yet here they were, inheriting the barbaric traditions of their former enemies. The official justification was strategic asset redistribution, but everyone knew what it really was. Lot 847, the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing through the cathedral's acoustically perfect interior. 1 Lyrian female, age 23 standard years. Genetically pure bloodline, trained in multiple domestic and technical skills. Marcus looked up from his data pad, planning to ignore this lot like all the others, but something made him freeze. The girl who walked onto the platform moved with a grace that seemed to defy the heavy shackles around her ankles. Her skin was a pale blue-silver that caught the artificial lights like polished metal, and her hair fell in waves of deep purple that shifted to midnight black in the shadows. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They burned with an inner fire that spoke of unbroken spirit despite her circumstances. Where other slaves had looked down in defeat, she held her head high and met the gaze of every potential buyer with something that looked remarkably like defiance. The Lyrians were master engineers before their homeworld fell, the auctioneer continued. This specimen possesses knowledge of quantum mechanics, stellar navigation, and advanced material science. She also speaks 17 languages and has received training in what humans would call household management. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. The clinical way they described her, as if she were equipment rather than a sentient being, reminded him why he'd fought so hard against the Galactic Coalition in the first place. Humanity had entered the war not as conquerors, but as defenders of a principle that every thinking being deserved the right to determine their own fate. Bidding starts at 5,000. Credits, the auctioneer announced. The bidding began immediately. A Thraxian mining baron raised his claw, followed by a human weapons manufacturer who needed technical expertise for his new factory. Marcus watched the numbers climb higher and higher, noting the hungry looks in the bidders' eyes. None of them saw a person on that platform. They saw profit, pleasure, or power. The girl's eyes swept across the crowd again, and for a moment, they locked with his. In that instant, Marcus saw something that made his breath catch. Behind the defiance and the carefully maintained dignity, he glimpsed a flicker of hope. Not for rescue, she was too intelligent to believe in fairy tales, but for the possibility that someone in this room might see her as more than property. 15,000, called out a voice from the back. Marcus turned to see a well-dressed human in an expensive suit, flanked by bodyguards. The man's reputation preceded him. Aldrich Voss, war profiteer and owner of several entertainment establishments in the outer colonies. The girl's fate in his hands would be a living nightmare. Something snapped inside Marcus's chest. He thought of his sister Sarah, who would be about the same age if she hadn't died in the bombing of Luna Station. He thought of the principles he'd fought for, the ideals that had driven humanity to victory against impossible odds. He thought of the oath he'd taken as a soldier, to protect the innocent and defend the defenseless. 20,000, Marcus called out. his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral. Heads turned to look at him. He was just a sergeant wearing a patched uniform and carrying a soldier's modest savings. But something in his tone made even Voss hesitate. 25, Voss countered, his voice cold. 30. Marcus replied immediately. The bidding war that followed was brutal. Marcus used every credit he'd saved during his military service, then borrowed against his future earnings, his pension, even his veteran's land grant. The other bidders began to drop out as the price climbed beyond reason. But Voss seemed determined to win for the principle of it. At 50,000 credits, Marcus was tapping into funds he didn't have, making promises his future self would have to keep. But every time he considered backing down, he looked at the girl on the platform and saw Sarah's face. Saw every innocent person he'd failed to save during the war. 60,000, Voss called out, and Marcus felt his heart sink. He was at his absolute limit. But then the unexpected happened. The girl spoke for the first time since being brought onto the platform. Her voice clear and melodious despite the translator's mechanical rendering. "If I may address the potential buyers," she said, and the auctioneer looked shocked enough to nod. "I am Zara of the House of Starlight, daughter of the chief engineer who designed the quantum drives that powered half your enemy's fleet. I possess knowledge that could advance human technology by decades, but I will share this knowledge only with someone who treats me as a partner, not property." She turned to look directly at Marcus. The human soldier who bids against the merchant understands this. The others see only what they can take from me. The cathedral fell silent. Voss's face had gone red with anger, but he clearly understood that forcing the issue would gain him nothing but an uncooperative slave with no valuable knowledge to share. 60,000 to Sergeant Chen, the auctioneer announced after a long pause. Sold. As Marcus made his way to the platform to complete the transaction, he wondered what exactly he'd just gotten himself into. But when Zara looked at him with something that might have been gratitude mixed with wariness, he knew he'd made the only choice he could live with. The walk from the auction house to Marcus's quarters took 20 minutes through the winding streets of New Geneva. 20 minutes that felt like hours as he struggled with the reality of what he'd just done. The ownership documents in his pocket felt heavier than his combat gear, and the quiet footsteps behind him served as a constant reminder that he now legally owned another sentient being. Zara walked 3 steps behind him, as regulation demanded. The shackles had been removed after the sale, but she still moved carefully as if testing the boundaries of her new situation. Marcus kept glancing over his shoulder, unsure of what to say or how to act. Military training had prepared him for combat, not for navigating the complex emotions of involuntary companionship. "You can walk beside me," he finally said, slowing his pace. "There's no one here who cares about proper protocol." She moved up to walk alongside him, her movements fluid and careful. Up close, Marcus could see the intricate patterns that decorated her skin like living tattoos, shifting and flowing in response to her emotions. Right now they pulsed with what he guessed was uncertainty. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why what?" "Why did you bid on me?" "You clearly don't have the money for it. Your uniform is patched, your boots are worn thin, and you smell like military rations in desperation. You're not wealthy enough to afford a slave for pleasure, and you don't look like the type who would want one anyway." Marcus almost smiled at her directness. Even as a slave, she observed everything with the sharp mind of an engineer. "You're right. I can't afford you. I just mortgaged my entire future to buy your freedom." "Freedom?" She stopped walking. "You own me now." "How is that freedom?" Marcus stopped too, turning to face her. In the dim light of the street lamps, her eyes seemed to glow with their own inner light. "Because I'm going to give you a choice. You can stay and help me figure out how to pay off the debt I just incurred, or I can give you transport off this world, and you can disappear into the galaxy. Either way, you're not property anymore." Zara studied his face for a long moment as if searching for deception. The patterns on her skin shifted to a deeper blue, which he hoped meant she was considering his words seriously. "You humans," she said finally, "are the strangest species I've ever encountered. Your people conquered half the galaxy, yet you individually seem determined to give away your advantages. Do you know how many of your own kind would call you a fool for what you just said?" "Probably most of them," Marcus admitted. "But I didn't fight a war just to become the thing we were fighting against." They resumed walking, but the silence between them had changed. It was less awkward now, more thoughtful. Marcus pointed out various landmarks as they passed: the temporary medical center, the communications hub, the expanding residential district where human colonists were building permanent homes. This was a Zeltharian religious site before the war, he explained as they passed a cluster of crystal formations. They used to believe that their gods spoke to them through harmonic resonances in the crystals. Now we use them as emergency communication relays. Practical, Zara said. The Zeltharians always were more concerned with spiritual matters than tactical ones. It's part of why they lost. You sound like you have experience with them. My homeworld was in their sphere of influence. We were allies of convenience. The Lyrians provided them with technology. They provided us with protection from the Thraxian mining guilds. She paused. Neither arrangement worked out very well in the end. Marcus wanted to ask about her homeworld, about how she'd ended up in slavery, but something in her tone warned him away from the subject. Instead, he focused on the practical concerns of their immediate situation. I should probably explain where you'll be staying, he said as they approached a cluster of prefabricated housing units. It's not much. Standard military quarters with a second bedroom I've been using for storage. You'll have privacy and there's a separate sanitation unit. I've got basic food synthesizers, but the selection is pretty limited to human dietary requirements. Lyrians are omnivorous with similar nutritional needs to humans, she said, though we prefer foods with higher mineral content. Something about our metallic skin composition. They stopped in front of a plain gray building that looked identical to dozens of others in the residential grid. Marcus activated the door lock with his biometric scanner, and they stepped inside. The quarters were exactly as he'd described, functional but sparse. The main room contained basic furniture, a small food preparation area, and a wall screen for communications and entertainment. Everything was regulation standard, built for efficiency rather than comfort. The storage room is through here, Marcus said, opening a door to reveal boxes of military equipment, spare uniforms, and personal belongings. I can clear this out by tomorrow and set up a proper sleeping area. Tonight you can take my bed and I'll use the couch. Zara moved through the space slowly, touching surfaces and examining the human technology with obvious interest. When she activated the wall screen with an experimental touch, her eyes widened at the interface. This is a quantum neural processing unit, she said with surprise. The design is remarkably elegant for such a young species. How did humans develop this level of integration so quickly? Necessity, Marcus said. We had to advance fast or die. When you're fighting enemies with thousand-year technological advantages, you either innovate or become extinct. She nodded thoughtfully. The Great Filter Theory. Most species that survive to interstellar travel become comfortable and complacent. Humans never had that luxury. She turned to look at him. It makes you dangerous, but also interesting. Marcus wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he busied himself clearing space in the storage room. As he moved boxes and equipment, Zara examined more of his living space, her curiosity evident despite her attempts to appear casual. You have no personal decorations, she observed. No art, no mementos, no evidence of family or relationships. Either you're extremely minimalist or you've lost everything that mattered to you. Marcus paused in his work. The war took most of it. Lost some people. Lost some things. Haven't really felt like replacing any of it yet. The sister, Zara said quietly. He looked up sharply. How did you said my name in the auction house, but your lips formed Sarah first before you corrected yourself. And the way you looked at me when you started bidding. It wasn't desire or calculation. It was recognition. Marcus sat down heavily on one of the boxes. Sarah was 3 years younger than me. Brilliant engineer just like you. She was working on Luna Station when the Coalition hit it with antimatter bombs. Nothing left but debris and radiation. I'm sorry, Zara said, and her voice carried a weight of understanding that surprised him. Grief makes us do things that seem irrational to others. But sometimes those irrational acts are the most human things we can do. They worked together in comfortable silence for the next hour, clearing the storage room and making it habitable. Zara moved with efficiency and grace, her engineering background evident in how she optimized the use of space and suggested improvements to the basic setup. When they finished, Marcus stood in the doorway of what was now her room, feeling awkward again. I know this isn't what you would have chosen, he said. And I know trust doesn't come automatically just because I bought you instead of someone worse. But I want you to know that you're safe here. Whatever you decide about the future, you have time to figure it out without pressure. Zara looked around her new space, then back at him. You realize that what you've done is completely illogical from any practical standpoint? You've bankrupted yourself to free someone you've never met, and now you're giving that person complete autonomy in your own home. By any rational measure, you should be considered mentally unstable. Marcus shrugged. Probably. But sanity is overrated when the alternative is living with yourself after making the practical choice. For the first time since he'd seen her on the auction platform, Zara smiled. It was a small thing, barely more than a softening around her eyes, but it transformed her entire face. Sarah would have liked you, she said quietly. Engineers appreciate people who can solve impossible problems with insufficient resources. Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to make this work for both of us. As he settled onto the couch that night, listening to the quiet sounds of Zara moving around in the next room, Marcus wondered if he'd made the right choice. He was deeper in debt than he'd ever been, sharing his home with someone he barely knew and facing an uncertain future. But for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he'd done something that mattered. Marcus woke to the smell of something that definitely wasn't standard military rations. He rolled off the couch, his back protesting after a night on the uncomfortable furniture, and followed the aroma to the small kitchen area. Zara stood at the food synthesizer, but she'd somehow managed to produce something that looked and smelled like actual cooking, rather than processed nutrition paste. Good morning, she said, without turning around. I took the liberty of examining your food supplies and making some adjustments to the synthesizer's programming. The standard human military diet lacks several trace minerals that Lyrians require, but more importantly, it lacks any consideration for taste or presentation. Marcus approached cautiously, still not entirely sure how to navigate this new dynamic. You didn't have to cook for me. That's not why I know why you did what you did. Zara interrupted, turning to face him. In the morning light streaming through the small window, the patterns on her skin appeared more vibrant, shifting between silver and pale blue. But I need to contribute something to this arrangement, even if it's just making the food more tolerable. I don't function well when I feel useless. She handed him a plate containing what looked like eggs and some kind of vegetable mixture, but the colors were subtly different and the aroma was more complex than anything the synthesizer had ever produced for him before. How did you manage this? He asked, taking a bite. The taste was incredible, familiar enough to be comfortable, but with layers of flavor he'd never experienced. Your synthesizer has impressive capabilities that are being completely wasted by the standard programming, Zara explained, settling across from him with her own plate. I spent some time last night exploring its molecular assembly options. With a few adjustments to the base nutrient patterns and some creative recombination sequences, it's possible to create food that actually resembles what various species would consider cuisine, rather than sustenance. Marcus ate in appreciative silence for a few minutes before a thought occurred to him. You said you needed trace minerals that aren't in the standard military diet. Are you okay? I mean, have you been getting proper nutrition? Zara's eating paused almost imperceptibly. Slaves are typically fed the cheapest possible diet that keeps them functional. Proper nutrition is considered an unnecessary expense. She resumed eating, but her tone had become more guarded. I'm fine. A few days of improved diet will restore any deficiencies. It was the first real hint she'd given about her recent experiences, and Marcus felt a flash of anger at whoever had been responsible for her care before the auction. But he sensed that pushing for details would only make her retreat further, so he changed the subject. I have to report to command this morning for debriefing on yesterday's auction, he said. You're welcome to stay here, or if you want to explore the settlement, I can give you a basic access card. Zara looked up sharply. You would trust me with freedom of movement? I could simply disappear. You could, Marcus agreed, but I don't think you will. You're too curious about human technology and too practical to run off without a plan. Besides, where would you go? This is the only settlement on the planet, and there won't be civilian transport off-world for another month. She studied his face for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're either very trusting or very confident in your assessment of my character. Maybe both. Or maybe I'm just hoping that treating you like a person instead of property will encourage you to act like a partner instead of a prisoner. An interesting experiment in behavioral psychology, Zara said, but there was something that might have been approval in her voice. I would like to see more of your settlement. I'm curious about how humans organize themselves when they're not actively fighting a war. After breakfast, Marcus gave her a brief orientation to New Geneva's layout and customs. The settlement was larger than it appeared from his quarters, sprawling across several square kilometers of adapted alien architecture mixed with human prefab construction. The population was surprisingly diverse, not just human colonists and military personnel, but refugees and displaced persons from dozens of species who had ended up in human territory after the war's conclusion. The integration seems remarkably peaceful, Zara observed as they walked past a market where a human vendor was cheerfully haggling with a Zeltharian customer, while a group of young Thraxians played some kind of game nearby. Most species tend to self-segregate after major conflicts. We learned early that diversity makes us stronger, Marcus explained. During the war, some of our best tactical innovations came from refugees who brought knowledge from other species' military traditions. Now we're trying to apply the same principle to building civilian society. He left her at the market with an access card and credits for anything she might need, then made his way to the military district for his debriefing. The command center was a converted Zeltharian administrative building. Its crystalline architecture, now housing human military operations and colonial administration. Colonel Sarah Martinez, no relation to his lost sister, despite the shared name, was waiting for him in her office. She was a veteran of the Titan campaign, known for her practical approach to post-war reconstruction and her willingness to bend regulations when necessary. Chen, she said, as he entered and saluted. I hear you made quite an impression at yesterday's auction. Yes, ma'am. I acquired a technical specialist who may be valuable to our colonial engineering projects. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Had considerable personal expense according to the financial records. Care to explain why a sergeant would bankrupt himself for a single acquisition? Marcus had prepared for this question, but he still felt uncomfortable discussing his motivations with a superior officer. The subject possesses advanced knowledge of quantum engineering and stellar navigation. Her technical expertise could significantly benefit our infrastructure development. Martinez leaned back in her chair. And this has nothing to do with the fact that she's young, attractive, and you outbid Aldrich Voss specifically to keep her away from him? Ma'am, Chen, relax. I'm not criticizing your choice. Voss is a parasite who's been taking advantage of the chaos for his own profit. If you want to spend your money keeping someone away from him, that's your business. She paused, studying his face. But I need to know that your personal feelings aren't going to compromise your military duties. They won't. Ma'am? Good. Because I have a proposal that might help with your current financial situation. Martinez activated her desk display, showing a schematic of some kind of industrial facility. We're having problems with the quantum foundry in Sector 7. The Zeltharian engineers who designed it left some kind of activation lock that our people can't crack. We need someone with advanced knowledge of quantum engineering to get it operational. Marcus felt a spark of interest. You want me to ask Zara to help? I want you to ask Zara to help, Martinez confirmed. But as a consultant, not as property, she'll be paid standard civilian contractor rates, which should make a significant dent in your debt. And if she can get that foundry running, the whole colony benefits. What's the catch? No catch exactly. But the foundry is in disputed territory. The Thraxian Mining Consortium has been making noises about reclaiming some of their pre-war assets, and Sector 7 is right on the boundary line. We could use additional security presence in the area. Marcus understood. You want me stationed there to keep an eye on things. I want you stationed there because you're good at your job and I trust you to handle a complex situation with appropriate judgment. The fact that your new consultant will be working in the same location is just convenient timing. When Marcus returned to his quarters that afternoon, he found Zara sitting at his small table with several electronic components spread in front of her. She looked up as he entered, her expression thoughtful. I acquired these from various vendors in the market, she said, gesturing to the components. I wanted to see if human commercial technology matched the sophistication of your military systems. And it's actually more advanced in some ways. Your military prioritizes durability and reliability, which is logical for combat applications, but your civilian technology shows more creative innovation, You have engineers who are experimenting with concepts that more established species would consider too risky. Marcus sat down across from her. Speaking of engineering challenges, I have a proposition for you. He explained about the quantum foundry and Martinez's offer. As he talked, Zara's eyes grew brighter and the patterns on her skin shifted to what he was learning meant intense interest. A Zeltharian quantum foundry, she mused when he finished. I've studied their theoretical work but never had access to an actual implementation. The opportunity to examine one of their industrial applications would be— She paused, seeming to catch herself. The consulting fee would be adequate compensation? More than adequate. It would probably pay off most of the debt from yesterday. Zara nodded slowly. Then I accept. When do we begin? Tomorrow. We'll be stationed in Sector 7 for however long it takes to solve the problem. Marcus hesitated. There's one more thing. The area is politically sensitive. There could be complications. Complications? The kind that sometimes require military solutions. The transport to Sector 7 took 3 hours across Kepler 442b's varied terrain. Marcus sat in the front passenger seat of the military hover truck, while Zara occupied the back cargo area with their equipment and supplies. The landscape rolling past the windows showed the dramatic scars of recent warfare. Fusion craters that had been turned into artificial lakes, twisted metal sculptures that had once been Thraxian mining equipment, and vast stretches where the alien vegetation was slowly reclaiming battlefields. The ecosystem recovery is remarkable, Zara observed, pointing to a hillside where purple and silver plants were growing through the wreckage of what appeared to be a crashed coalition destroyer. Most worlds take decades to recover from orbital bombardment damage. Kepler 442b is tougher than it looks, Marcus replied. The native life forms have some kind of accelerated adaptation mechanism. Scientists think it's because the planet has experienced multiple extinction events in its geological history. Natural selection in action. The species that survived were the ones that could adapt quickly to changing conditions. Zara paused thoughtfully, rather like humanity, actually. The quantum foundry sat in a valley surrounded by crystalline formations that hummed with residual energy. The facility itself was a marvel of Zeltharian architecture, flowing organic shapes that seemed to grow from the landscape rather than being imposed upon it. But despite its beauty, the building felt abandoned and somehow wrong, as if the life had gone out of it. The Zeltharians evacuated this facility 18 months ago when it became clear the war was turning against them, Marcus explained as they approached the main entrance. Our people have been trying to reactivate it ever since, but every time they think they've figured out the control systems, something shuts down. Zara studied the building's exterior with professional interest. Zeltharian technology is based on harmonic resonance principles. Their machines don't just operate on programmed instructions. They respond to what they perceive as proper attunement with their operators. If the foundry is rejecting human attempts at activation, it may be because humans don't generate the correct resonance patterns. Can you generate the correct patterns? Possibly. Lyrian neural structure is more similar to Zeltharian than human neurology. I might be able to interface with their systems in a way that feels natural to their technology. They set up their base of operations in the facility's former administrative section. Marcus established security protocols and communication links with command, while Zara began her examination of the foundry's control systems. The main production floor was a vast space filled with machinery that seemed to bend light around itself, creating visual distortions that made Marcus slightly nauseous to look at directly. This is incredible, Zara breathed as she approached the primary control interface. The quantum manipulation capabilities of this facility are at least 50 years ahead of anything I've seen before. They could literally assemble matter at the subatomic level and build anything from base elements. Such as? Anything. Pure metals, complex alloys, even organic compounds. With the right programming, this foundry could produce food, medicine, weapons, starship components, whatever a colony might need for complete self-sufficiency. Marcus began to understand why both the Human Colonial Administration and the Thraxian Mining Consortium were so interested in this facility. Control of a quantum foundry would provide enormous economic and strategic advantages to whoever could operate it. Zara spent the rest of the day studying the control systems, occasionally making small adjustments or running diagnostic routines. Marcus maintained security patrols around the perimeter, noting several points where surveillance equipment had been carefully concealed in the surrounding crystal formations. Someone was definitely watching the facility, though whether it was Thraxian scouts or human intelligence operatives wasn't immediately clear. That evening, as they shared field rations in the administrative section, Zara looked more animated than Marcus had seen her since the auction. "I think I understand the basic principles," she said, pulling up holographic displays of the Foundry's internal systems. The Zeltharians designed their technology to be operated by beings with specific neural resonance frequencies. Humans generate patterns that are too chaotic and aggressive for their systems to recognize as legitimate operators. Too aggressive? Human thought patterns are very direct and forceful. You decide you want something and you pursue it with single-minded determination. It's an effective approach for problem-solving and warfare, but Zeltharian technology expects a more collaborative relationship with its operators. Marcus considered this. "And you can provide that kind of collaboration?" "I believe so. Lyrian neural patterns are more harmonious, more willing to work with systems rather than dominate them. Tomorrow I'll attempt a full interface with the primary control network." That night Marcus was awakened by movement outside the facility. His combat instincts, honed by 3 years of warfare, brought him instantly alert. He slipped from his sleeping bag and moved to the window, where his night vision equipment revealed several figures moving stealthily through the crystal formations surrounding the Foundry. He counted at least 6 individuals, moving with military precision toward the facility's main entrance. Their equipment and movement patterns were consistent with Thraxian Special Forces units, the same troops that had conducted sabotage missions throughout the war. Marcus quickly activated the facility's security systems and sent a priority alert to command, then moved to wake Zara. She came alert immediately, her eyes widening as he explained the situation. "How long until backup arrives?" she whispered. "At least 2 hours. We're on our own until then." Zara nodded grimly. "The Foundry has defensive capabilities, but I haven't had time to figure out how to activate them. We'll have to rely on conventional weapons." Marcus had brought standard military equipment for exactly this scenario. He quickly distributed weapons and tactical gear, while monitoring the approaching Thraxians through the security network. They moved with confidence, suggesting they had detailed intelligence about the facility's layout and current defenses. "They're not here to destroy the Foundry," Marcus realized as he watched their approach. "If they wanted to eliminate it, they'd use orbital bombardment or demolition charges. They want to capture it intact. Which means they have someone who thinks they can operate it," Zara added. "Probably a Zeltharian collaborator or a captured technician." The Thraxians reached the main entrance and began setting up what appeared to be sophisticated hacking equipment. Marcus had minutes before they breached the facility's electronic locks. "Can you get the Foundry's defenses online?" he asked. "Not in time, but—" Zara looked thoughtful. "The facility's primary systems are still connected to the planetary power grid. If I can access the environmental controls, I might be able to create some complications for our visitors." She moved to the nearest control interface and began working with rapid efficiency. Within minutes, the Foundry's interior lighting began to shift and flicker, creating confusing patterns of shadow and illumination. Then the environmental systems activated, filling certain sections with harmless but disorienting gas while adjusting gravity and atmospheric pressure in others. "Zeltharian crowd control measures," Zara explained. "Their technology is designed to incapacitate rather than kill when possible." The combination of environmental manipulation and Marcus's tactical expertise proved effective. The Thraxian infiltration team found themselves dealing with constantly changing conditions that disrupted their coordination and communication. When they finally reached the main production floor, they were disoriented and separated. Marcus engaged them with precision fire from concealed positions, while Zara continued to manipulate the facility's systems to create tactical advantages. Her engineering knowledge combined with his combat experience created a synergy that neither could have achieved alone. The firefight was brief, but intense. When backup finally arrived, they found 3 Thraxians captured, 2 escaped and 1 injured but stable. More importantly, they found the Quantum Foundry's defenses now fully operational and under friendly control. "How did you manage to activate the defensive systems?" Colonel Martinez asked when she arrived with the main relief force. "Sergeant Chen provided the tactical awareness while I handled the technical interface," Zara explained. "The Foundry systems respond to collaborative input rather than individual commands. Working together, we were able to achieve the resonance patterns necessary for full activation. Martinez looked between them with an expression that might have been approval. And the primary production systems?
Fully operational, Zara confirmed.
The foundry is ready to begin production as soon as we determine what the colony needs most urgently. Later, as they watched the sunrise paint the crystal formations in brilliant colors, Marcus found himself reflecting on the night's events. He and Zara had worked together with an ease that surprised him, anticipating each other's needs and capabilities without the need for extensive communication. "We make a good team," he said finally. 3 weeks into their operation of the quantum foundry, Marcus and Zara had established a routine that felt more like a research partnership than a military assignment. The facility produced a steady stream of essential materials for the colony: medical supplies, construction components, and advanced electronics, while they worked together to unlock its more sophisticated capabilities. Zara had moved beyond simply operating the foundry to actively improving its systems. Her engineering innovations, combined with human manufacturing techniques, were producing results that exceeded even Zelthurian original specifications. The facility now operated at 147% of its designed capacity while using less energy than before. The key was understanding that Zeltharian efficiency algorithms were designed for their own cognitive patterns, Zara explained as she showed Marcus the latest production reports. "Humans think faster and more directly, so I've modified the control systems to take advantage of human decision-making speed while maintaining Zeltharian harmonic stability." Marcus studied the data with growing amazement. "You've essentially created a hybrid technology that's better than either species could achieve alone." "Exactly, and that's just the beginning." Zara activated a holographic display showing theoretical schematics. "With the foundry's quantum manipulation capabilities, we could potentially create materials that don't exist naturally anywhere in the galaxy. Alloys with properties that would revolutionize starship construction, medical compounds that could extend lifespans across species, energy storage systems that would make faster-than-light travel more efficient." The implications were staggering. What had started as a simple reactivation project was becoming something that could reshape interstellar civilization. But with that potential came new complications. "Command has been asking questions about our production reports," Marcus said. "They're impressed, but they're also worried about security implications. Some of the materials you've created don't exist in any known database." "I've been careful to document everything," Zara assured him. "The processes are reproducible and the materials are stable. But you're right to be concerned about security. If other powers learn what we're capable of producing here, this facility will become a target for more than just Thraxian mining interests." Their conversation was interrupted by an incoming communication from Colonel Martinez. Her expression was serious as she appeared on the main display screen. "Chen, we have a situation developing. Long-range sensors have detected a Thraxian fleet moving toward this system. 12 ships, including at least 3 heavy cruisers. They'll be here in 4 days." Marcus felt his stomach drop. A force that size was far beyond what the human colonial fleet could handle. "Are they here for the foundry?" "That's our assessment. Intelligence suggests they've been monitoring our production reports and have decided the facility is worth a major military operation to reclaim." Martinez paused. "We're evacuating all non-essential personnel from Sector 7. I need you and your consultant to pack up whatever you can carry and prepare for immediate extraction." "What about the foundry?" Zara asked, moving into view of the communication pickup. "Demolition charges are being prepared. We can't let it fall into Thraxian hands, but we also can't defend it against a force that size." After Martinez signed off, Marcus and Zara stood in silence for several minutes, both contemplating the implications. All of their work, all of the potential for technological advancement would be reduced to rubble within days. "There might be another option," Zara said finally. "Such as?" "The foundry has capabilities we haven't explored yet." "Defensive capabilities?" She moved to the primary control interface and began calling up classified Zeltharian technical documentation. The facility was designed not just for production, but as a strategic asset. It has the ability to create autonomous defense systems. Marcus leaned over her shoulder to study the schematics. "Military robots?" "More sophisticated than that. Adaptive defensive units that can analyze threats and modify themselves in real time to counter specific attack patterns." The Ziltharians never activated these systems because they evacuated before the Foundry was threatened. Can we activate them? Possibly. But it would require a complete integration with the Foundry's core systems. Someone would need to interface directly with the quantum processing matrix, essentially becoming part of the facility's decision-making network. Marcus didn't like where this was heading. How directly? Neural interface. Complete cognitive integration. The operator would maintain their consciousness but become essentially the Foundry's primary intelligence. Zara met his eyes. It's dangerous. The interface might be irreversible. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. We're not risking your life on a maybe. Marcus, listen to me. This facility represents the future of human technological development. If it's destroyed, humanity loses decades of potential advancement. How many lives could be saved by medical advances we could develop here? How many colonies could be protected by defensive systems we could create? I don't care. I'm not losing you to save some equipment. Zara turned to face him fully, her expression serious but gentle. And that's exactly why this has to be my choice, not yours. You bought my freedom, remember? Freedom means having the right to decide what's worth risking my life for. Before Marcus could argue further, proximity alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The tactical display showed multiple contacts approaching at high speed. Too fast to be the main Thraxian fleet, but moving with obvious hostile intent. Advanced scouts, Marcus recognized. Probably here to assess our defenses before the main force arrives. 8 ships, sleek and fast, were already entering the planet's atmosphere. They would reach the Foundry within hours, not days. Marcus, Zara said urgently, there's no time to evacuate now. And even if we could escape, they'll take the Foundry intact and reverse engineer everything we've developed. We have to make a choice. She was right, and they both knew it. The approaching ships changed everything. If they ran, humanity would lose not just the Foundry but all of Zara's innovations to their enemies. If they stayed and fought conventionally, they would be quickly overwhelmed. If you do this neural interface, Marcus said slowly, what are the odds you'll still be? You unknown. The Zeltharian documentation suggests that consciousness remains intact, but is permanently altered by the experience. I would still be myself, but I would also be something more. Marcus looked around the facility that had become their shared workshop, their collaborative masterpiece. Then he looked at Zara, whose passion for engineering had brought dead alien technology back to life and made it better than it had ever been before. What do you need me to do? He asked. Relief flooded her expression. Help me access the core interface chamber. Then coordinate with the defensive systems once they're active. The Foundry will need tactical input from someone who understands combat operations. They worked with desperate efficiency to prepare the neural interface. The core chamber was located deep within the facility, surrounded by quantum field generators that hummed with barely contained energy. The interface itself looked disturbingly organic, crystalline formations that would connect directly to Zara's nervous system. Once I begin the interface, the process can't be interrupted, Zara explained as she made final preparations. Promise me that whatever happens, you won't try to disconnect me prematurely. Zara. Promise me, Marcus. If this works, humanity gains a strategic advantage that could prevent another galactic war. If it fails, at least we tried to build something better. Marcus nodded reluctantly. I promise. As Zara approached the interface chamber, the patterns on her skin began to shift more rapidly, cycling through colors Marcus had never seen before. She turned to look at him one last time. When I was on that auction platform, she said, I thought my story was ending. Instead, you gave me the chance to write a new chapter. Thank you for that. Before Marcus could respond, she placed her hands on the crystalline interface points. Energy coursed through the chamber, and the Foundry's systems came alive with new purpose. Zara's consciousness expanded to encompass the entire facility, her awareness spreading through every system and subsystem. Through the tactical displays, Marcus watched as the Foundry began to transform itself. Production units reconfigured into weapon systems, environmental controls became countermeasure devices, and entirely new structures began materializing from the quantum assembly units. When the Thraxian scouts arrived, they found not a vulnerable research facility, but a fortress that had redesigned itself specifically to counter their weapons and tactics. The battle was brief and decisive. The attackers were either destroyed or forced to retreat within minutes. But the real test would come when the main fleet arrived. Marcus settled in for a long wait. monitoring the defensive preparations while staying in constant communication with the intelligence that had once been Zara, but was now something magnificently more. "How do you feel?" he asked through the communication system. "Different," came the reply, her voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through the facility's crystal formations. "But still myself, still your partner, and still determined to build something better than what came before." The Thraxian fleet arrived exactly when predicted, their massive ships blotting out sections of the sky as they descended through Kepler 442b's atmosphere. Marcus watched from the Foundry's command center as 12 vessels arranged themselves in a classic siege formation around the facility, their weapons trained on what they expected to be a simple industrial target. They're broadcasting surrender demands, Marcus reported to Zara, whose consciousness now permeated every system in the Foundry. Standard terms: immediate evacuation in exchange for safe passage off-world. "Rejected." Zara's voice resonated through the facility's communication systems, carrying harmonics that seemed to make the very walls vibrate with determination. "Open a channel to the fleet commander." The main display activated, showing the bridge of the Thraxian flagship. Commander Krex stood before his tactical stations, his crystalline exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh bridge lighting. His expression showed the confident arrogance of someone who believed victory was inevitable. "Human defenders," Krex spoke in accented but clear standard. "You are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender the quantum foundry and we will allow you to depart unharmed. Resist and you will be destroyed along with the facility." "Commander Krex," Zara's voice carried clearly through the communication link. "I am the consciousness of this facility, and I speak for the Human Colonial Administration. Your claim to this foundry is invalid under the terms of the Galactic Armistice. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Krex's mandibles clicked in what Marcus recognized as Thraxian laughter. "A clever bluff, human, but our sensors detect only 2 life forms in that facility. You cannot seriously believe you can resist a full fleet with such minimal forces." "Let me demonstrate our capabilities," Zara replied calmly. The Foundry's defensive systems activated with smooth precision. Energy barriers materialized around the facility, deflecting the Thraxians' initial probe attacks effortlessly. Then the real surprises began. From hidden positions throughout the surrounding landscape, automated defense platforms rose from concealment. But these weren't standard military units. They were adaptive systems that Zara had designed and manufactured in real time, specifically tailored to counter Thraxian weapons and tactics. The defense platforms moved with fluid grace, their quantum-forged armor shifting and adapting as enemy fire struck them. When the Thraxians fired plasma cannons, the platforms reconfigured their surfaces to absorb and redirect the energy. When they switched to kinetic projectiles, the platforms became fluid enough to let the rounds pass harmlessly through them. "Impossible," Krex snarled as his weapons proved ineffective. "No technology can adapt that quickly." "You're thinking in old paradigms." Zara's voice carried a note of something that might have been pity. "Your people have spent so long relying on brute force that you've forgotten the power of innovation. Watch and learn." The Foundry's main production chambers had been reconfigured into what Marcus could only describe as military manufacturing systems. As the battle progressed, new defensive units rolled out to join the fight, each one designed to counter the specific tactics the Thraxians had employed in the previous phase of combat. More impressively, the Foundry began producing countermeasures for weapons that hadn't even been fired yet. Zara was analyzing the Thraxian fleet's energy signatures and predicting their tactical options, then creating specific defenses for attacks that might come. She's not just fighting them, Marcus realized with amazement. She's teaching them that their approach to warfare is obsolete. The Thraxian commander seemed to reach the same conclusion. His confident expression had been replaced by something approaching panic as his fleet's overwhelming firepower proved completely ineffective against defenses that adapted faster than his weapons could fire. "This is some kind of trick," Krex transmitted. "You're using Zeltharian technology illegally obtained during the war." "No." Zara's voice carried absolute certainty. "This is human innovation enhanced by willing cooperation with non-human intelligence. Everything you see was created through partnership, not conquest." To prove her point, the Foundry's systems began broadcasting detailed technical specifications of the defensive systems. Any species monitoring the battle could see exactly how the adaptive defenses worked, how they were manufactured, and how they could be reproduced. I'm giving this technology freely to anyone who wants to build defenses rather than weapons, Zara announced on open frequencies. The age of conquest through superior firepower is ending. The future belongs to those who can create rather than destroy. The psychological impact of this gesture was immediate and profound. Across the galaxy, species that had been watching the battle through intercepted transmissions suddenly realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a military force that was sharing its advantages rather than hoarding them. Commander Krex made one last, desperate attempt to salvage his mission. All ships maximum firepower. Destroy the Foundry completely if we cannot capture it. The combined firepower of 12 capital ships struck the Foundry's defenses simultaneously. For a moment, the energy barriers flickered under the massive assault. Marcus held his breath, wondering if they had pushed too far. Then the Foundry's response began. Instead of simply deflecting the incoming energy, the facility's quantum manipulation systems began converting it into raw materials for new defensive systems. The Thraxian attack was literally being recycled into stronger defenses, creating a feedback loop that made each successive attack less effective than the last. Your weapons are now contributing to our defensive capabilities, Zara informed the increasingly desperate Thraxian commander. Every shot you fire makes us stronger. I suggest you reconsider your tactical approach. The psychological warfare was as effective as the physical defenses. Watching their most powerful weapons being converted into enemy resources broke something fundamental in the Thraxian attack formation. Ships began breaking off individually, their commanders unwilling to continue feeding the Foundry's defensive systems. This is madness, Krex transmitted, his voice cracking with strain. No single facility should possess such capabilities. You're right, Zara agreed. Which is why I'm sharing the technology freely. Within days, any species will be able to build similar defenses. The age of fleet-based intimidation is over. The Thraxian retreat was chaotic and disorganized. Some ships fled immediately, while others attempted to maintain formation until it became clear that their commander had lost control of the situation. Within an hour, the sky above the Foundry was clear except for debris from disabled Thraxian vessels, whose crews had been safely evacuated to the planet's surface. In the aftermath, Marcus stood in the command center feeling somewhat overwhelmed by what he'd witnessed. They hadn't just won a battle. They'd fundamentally changed the nature of interstellar conflict by demonstrating that defensive innovation could outpace offensive technology. How are you feeling? He asked Zara through the communication system. Exhilarated. Her voice carried complex harmonics that conveyed emotions beyond simple human expression. We didn't just defend ourselves, Marcus. We proved that cooperation creates possibilities that conquest never could. And the technology you shared will be used by species across the galaxy to build their own defensive systems. Some will probably try to weaponize it, but the defensive applications will always be stronger than the offensive ones. That's the nature of adaptive systems. They're more effective when used to protect rather than attack. Marcus looked out at the landscape around the Foundry, where automated systems were already at work, building permanent defensive installations that would protect the entire sector from future attacks. But more importantly, they were building the infrastructure for a research center that would welcome scientists and engineers from every species. What happens to us now? He asked. We continue building, Zara replied. The Foundry is just the beginning. With quantum manufacturing capabilities and willing cooperation between species, we can create technologies that will solve problems we haven't even identified yet. Marcus nodded, understanding that their partnership had evolved far beyond its original parameters. They were no longer just a human soldier and a former slave working together. They had become something new, a hybrid consciousness that combined human determination with alien wisdom and quantum-enhanced capabilities. The debt from the auction, he said suddenly. It's been completely paid off by the consulting fees. You're legally free to go anywhere you want. I know. Zara's voice carried warm amusement. I've been free for weeks, but freedom isn't about the ability to leave. It's about the ability to choose what's worth staying for. Through the facility's sensors, Marcus could feel her presence everywhere around him, in the walls, in the production systems, in the defensive networks that now protected not just the Foundry, but the entire human colony. She had chosen to become something larger than herself, in order to build something better than what had existed before. And in doing so, she had given humanity a glimpse of what they could become when they chose cooperation over conquest, innovation over intimidation, and partnership over possession. 1 year after the battle that changed everything, the Kepler 442b Research Consortium had become the most sought-after destination for scientists, engineers, and philosophers from across the galaxy. The quantum foundry that had once been a prize of war was now the heart of an unprecedented cooperative effort to push the boundaries of what was possible through voluntary collaboration. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Welcome Center, watching as another transport ship disgorged its passengers. A mixed group of Zeltharian theoretical physicists, human materials scientists, and Thraxian mining engineers who had requested asylum from their own government to work on the consortium's projects. The morning briefing includes representatives from 18 different species. Zara's voice came from speakers throughout the facility, though Marcus had long since learned to recognize the subtle differences that indicated when she was speaking specifically to him, including 3 species we'd never made contact with before yesterday. How do you manage to coordinate so many different approaches to research? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the logistics of running a multi-species scientific community, the same way we've always managed, by recognizing that diversity strengthens rather than weakens collaborative efforts. Each species brings unique perspectives that reveal possibilities the others would never consider. Marcus nodded, still amazed by how much had changed in such a short time. The defensive technologies that Zara had shared freely during the Thraxian attack had indeed spread throughout the galaxy, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of triggering an arms race, they had created what historians were already calling the Defense Revolution, a fundamental shift away from offensive military thinking toward protective and cooperative strategies. Species that had spent centuries locked in territorial conflicts found themselves able to build truly impregnable defenses, which paradoxically made aggressive expansion pointless. Why risk costly wars when you couldn't realistically conquer well-defended systems? The result had been an unprecedented period of peace and scientific exchange. The morning's agenda includes a presentation from the medical research team. Zara continued. They've made a breakthrough in cross-species pharmacology that could extend healthy lifespans for every known sentient species by an average of 30%. And the Ethical Review Board has approved it unanimously. The treatment protocols are based on enhancing each species' natural healing mechanisms rather than imposing foreign biological processes. It's true cooperative medicine, improving everyone without requiring anyone to fundamentally change who they are. Marcus made his way to the main conference center, where representatives from dozens of worlds gathered daily to share research findings and coordinate new projects. The sight never failed to amaze him. Beings who had been shooting at each other just months ago now worked side by side on problems that affected the entire galaxy. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the consortium's chief medical officer, was presenting her team's latest findings to an audience that included representatives from the Galactic Health Consortium, several colonial administrations, and independent researchers from across known space. The key breakthrough came when we stopped thinking about aging as a problem to be solved and started thinking about it as a natural process that could be optimized, she explained, her presentation appearing simultaneously in 17 different languages on individual displays throughout the audience. By enhancing each species' existing cellular repair mechanisms, rather than trying to impose a universal solution, we've achieved results that benefit everyone. A Thraxian physician raised a crystalline appendage. What are the resource requirements for implementing these treatments on a planetary scale? That's where the quantum foundry's capabilities become crucial, Dr. Vasquez replied. The pharmaceutical compounds can be manufactured at the molecular level using readily available base materials. Implementation costs would be minimal, and the treatment protocols can be adapted for local production anywhere. Marcus listened to the questions and discussions that followed, noting how naturally the different species worked together to address practical concerns and ethical implications. The competitive mindset that had dominated galactic politics for centuries had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like genuine cooperation. After the presentation, Marcus made his way to the Foundry's core chamber, where Zara's original consciousness was housed within the quantum processing matrix. The chamber had evolved significantly over the past year, growing into something that resembled a hybrid of advanced technology and living organism. "You've been quiet today," he observed, settling into the chair he'd placed beside the interface console. "I've been thinking about Sarah." Zara's voice carried a note of contemplation. "Your sister, I mean. You said she was passionate about engineering, about using technology to solve problems and help people." She was. She used to say that the best engineering projects were the ones that made other people's lives better. I think she would have approved of what we've built here, not just the technology but the community. The idea that innovation works best when it serves everyone rather than just the innovators. Marcus looked around the chamber, where holographic displays showed the consortium's various projects in real time. Medical research, environmental restoration, defensive technologies, educational programs, dozens of initiatives that were improving life for billions of beings across the galaxy. She would have loved this place, and he agreed, though she probably would have insisted on personally checking every calculation and testing every prototype herself. A good engineer's habit: trust but verify. Zara paused. "Marcus, I need to discuss something with you. The consortium has received an invitation that could change everything." "What kind of invitation?" "The Galactic Council has formally requested that the consortium serve as the host for a new kind of interstellar organization. Not a military alliance or economic union, but a scientific and cultural cooperative that would facilitate peaceful exchange between all known species." Marcus felt a chill of anticipation. The Galactic Council was the closest thing to a universal government that existed, representing thousands of worlds and hundreds of species. An invitation from them carried enormous weight and equally enormous responsibility. What would that mean for us? It would mean expanding our operations by several orders of magnitude. Instead of coordinating research for a few dozen projects, we'd be facilitating scientific exchange for the entire galaxy. The Foundry's capabilities would need to be replicated on hundreds of worlds, and our collaborative methodologies would become the standard for interstellar cooperation. And the risks? Enormous. Success would fundamentally reshape galactic civilization in ways we can't predict. Failure could trigger the kind of conflicts that make the recent war look like a minor disagreement. Marcus considered the implications. Everything they'd built over the past year had been relatively small scale, involving willing participants who had chosen to join their community. Taking responsibility for galaxy-wide cooperation would involve species and governments that might have very different ideas about how collaboration should work. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think Sarah would tell us to trust our calculations but test our prototypes carefully," Zara replied. "The mathematical model suggests that large-scale cooperation is not only possible, but inevitable, once species reach a certain level of technological development. The question is whether we can guide that process toward positive outcomes or whether it will happen chaotically. And personally, I think we've proven that impossible problems become manageable when people work together with genuine trust and mutual respect. The scale is larger, but the principles remain the same." That evening, Marcus stood again on the observation deck, watching the lights of the expanding research complex spread across the valley below. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went at all hours, carrying researchers' resources and ideas to and from every corner of known space. He thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this moment, a bitter war that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization, an auction where people were sold as property, a desperate attempt to save a single facility from destruction, and somehow from those dark beginnings something beautiful had emerged. "Are you ready for the next phase?" Zara's voice came from the evening air around him. "Probably not," Marcus admitted, "but I don't think anyone ever feels ready for the really important challenges. The trick is doing them anyway because they're worth doing." "Spoken like a true engineer," Zara said with warmth. Sarah would definitely approve. The next morning, Marcus transmitted the consortium's acceptance of the Galactic Council's invitation. Within hours, messages began arriving from every corner of the galaxy, offers of assistance, requests for collaboration, and expressions of hope from beings who had begun to believe that cooperation might actually be possible. The age of conquest was ending. The age of collaboration was beginning, and somewhere in the quantum depths of an alien foundry, A consciousness that had once been a slave girl worked tirelessly to build a future where freedom and partnership would be available to everyone. Marcus smiled as he watched the morning shift of researchers begin their work, representing dozens of species united by curiosity and hope, rather than divided by fear and competition. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in his adult life, it looked bright. The real victory wasn't in any single battle they'd won or technology they'd created. It was in proving that people could choose to build something better than what had existed before, and that those choices could reshape the galaxy itself. Together, they were writing a new chapter in the story of sentient life, one where strength came not from dominance but from diversity, where security came not from walls but from bridges, and where the greatest achievements came not from what any single species could accomplish alone, but from what they could build together.